Someone says something to you, not even the worst thing they have ever said, not the cruelest or the loudest, just one more thing, layered on top of all the other things, and something inside you shifts. Not with anger. Anger you have felt before and it always passed. This is different. This is clarity. A quiet, unargued, bone-deep clarity that says, not anymore. No performance, no announcement, no ultimatum delivered to the room, just a decision made somewhere so deep inside you that it does not need anyone else's permission or agreement or understanding. Not anymore. And here is what the Stoics knew, what Marcus Aurelius wrote about in the privacy of his journals, what Epictetus taught from the hard-won authority of a man who had been stripped of everything external and forced to find everything internal, what Seneca spent his final years trying to put into words precise enough to last. Here is what they knew. That decision is not the end of something. It is the beginning of the most important transformation available to a human being. The day you stop tolerating disrespect is not the day you become harder. It is the day you become clearer. And clarity in a world designed to keep you confused about your own worth is the most dangerous thing you can carry. Stay with me. Because this video is not about anger. It is not about confrontation. It is not about finally saying the thing you have been rehearsing in your head for years. It is about what happens quietly, permanently, and completely on the other side of that decision. And why the Stoics believed it was the most important line a person could cross. Before we go into the principles, I need to say something that most people in your position have never been told directly. Tolerating disrespect is not kindness. It is not patience. It is not the high road. It is not evidence of emotional maturity or spiritual development or any of the other things we dress it up as when we are trying to make sense of why we keep accepting treatment that diminishes us. Tolerating disrespect when it becomes a pattern is a slow and quiet form of self-abandonment, and the most insidious thing about it is that it happens so gradually you barely notice it happening. It starts with something small. A comment you let pass because the moment wasn't right. A boundary you didn't enforce because you didn't want to cause a scene. A version of yourself you made smaller to fit into a space that should have expanded to hold you. And then it happens again and again. And each time it happens, the tolerance threshold shifts slightly. What would have been unacceptable 2 years ago becomes uncomfortable, and what was uncomfortable becomes normal, and what is normal becomes invisible. Until one day you look at the relationships in your life, the dynamics in your workplace, the conversations you're having, and you realize that somewhere along the way you agreed to terms you never consciously signed. The Stoics had a precise understanding of how this happens. Epictetus, who knew more about the mechanics of self-abandonment than almost any philosopher in history, because he had lived inside the most extreme version of it, where another human being legally owned him, wrote something that cuts to the center of this. Never say about anything that I have lost it, but that I have returned it. He was talking about external things, possessions, freedom, status, but the principle reaches further. What have you returned? What have you quietly handed back? Your voice, your standards, your sense of what you deserve, piece by piece, in moments too small to feel like decisions but large enough, accumulated to change who you are. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in words meant only for himself, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. Simple, almost too simple. But underneath that simplicity is a demand that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Know what is right, and then do it, without negotiation, without waiting for the room to agree, without softening it until it disappears. Today we are going to walk through 5 principles, 5 things that the Stoics understood about what happens when a person finally, fully and without apology, decides that they are done tolerating treatment that diminishes them, not as a motivational exercise, as a map, because the decision is only the beginning. What matters is what you build on the other side of it. 1. The standard you set becomes the life you live. Imagine a woman named Carol. She is 53 years old, a project director at a non-profit in Atlanta, who has spent 20 years doing work she genuinely believes in, surrounded by people whose mission she shares and whose behavior, on too many occasions, she has quietly absorbed. Her executive director has a way of speaking to her in meetings that she cannot quite name but has always felt. It is not shouting. It is not obvious aggression. It is something subtler. A tone that implies Carol's contributions are barely adequate, a habit of cutting her off mid-sentence and completing her thoughts less accurately than she would have, a pattern of crediting her ideas to the room rather than to Carol specifically. She has tolerated it for 7 years, not because she didn't notice, not because she wasn't hurt by it, but because the cause was important, because she didn't want to be difficult, because she told herself in the quiet language of self-persuasion that it wasn't that bad, that she was being too sensitive, that this was just how he was, and you had to learn to work around it. For 7 years, Carol set a standard. She just didn't realize she was setting it. The standard was, this is acceptable. And once a standard is set, once a pattern is established and repeatedly reinforced, it does not stay in one place, it expands. It moves from the conference room to one-on-one conversations. It moves from professional interactions to the way her executive director speaks about her work to funders and board members. It moves into Carol's own internal voice, which has slowly, without her full awareness, begun to sound more like him than like her. The Stoics understood the mechanics of standards with extraordinary precision. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself as a reminder he apparently needed to hear more than once. The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are. Look things in the face and know them for what they are, not what you wish they were, not the most charitable interpretation you can construct to make the situation bearable, what they actually are. What Carol's situation actually was, a person in authority had established over 7 years, and with her implicit cooperation, that she could be treated as less than she was. And every day that she showed up and absorbed it without response, she renewed the agreement. She was not a passive victim in this story. That is not a condemnation. It is the most liberating reframe available to her. Because if her tolerance had helped create the standard, then her intolerance could change it. Marcus Aurelius wrote somewhere else in his journals, in a line that sounds almost aggressive, coming from a man known for his gentleness. Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect. Lose your self-respect. Carol had not lost hers in a single moment. She had lent it out incrementally over 7 years of letting the standard slide. The day she took it back did not look like a confrontation. It looked like a conversation, calm, specific, and without apology, in which she named the pattern clearly and stated without drama or ultimatum what she would and would not accept going forward. Her executive director was surprised, not because Carol had been hiding her feelings, but because the standard had been so thoroughly established that her enforcement of a new one felt, to him, like an anomaly. It was not an anomaly. It was a correction, and what followed was not a perfect working relationship, but it was a different one in which the terms had been renegotiated, not by argument or emotion, but by the quiet authority of a woman who had decided, finally, what she was willing to accept. Here is the first principle. The standard you tolerate is the standard you set. You are always communicating what is acceptable, through what you say, through what you do, and most powerfully, through what you consistently absorb without response. The day you raise that standard, clearly, calmly, and without negotiation, is the day the quality of every relationship in your life begins to shift. Not because you have become aggressive, because you have become clear. And clarity in human relationships changes everything. 2. What self-respect actually costs. Now meet a man named Arthur. He is 61 years old, a recently retired police sergeant from a mid-sized city in Texas who spent 33 years in a profession that required him almost daily to absorb things that would break most people and keep moving. He is not a soft man. He has never been a soft man. But there is one arena in which Arthur has spent his entire adult life being soft in ways he has never admitted to anyone, including himself, his family. Specifically, his older brother. His older brother is a successful businessman, more outwardly successful than Arthur by every conventional measure, and he has spent decades making sure Arthur knows it, not in speeches, in the accumulated weight of small moments. A comment about Arthur's pension at Christmas, a question about Arthur's house at Thanksgiving, a tone of voice in certain conversations that places Arthur, subtly but unmistakably, in the position of the lesser brother. And Arthur, who would not have tolerated that tone from anyone on the street, or anyone in an interrogation room, or anyone in 33 years of professional confrontations, has absorbed it at his family's table for decades. Because it was family. Because you don't make a scene at Christmas. Because some part of Arthur, underneath the badge and the career and the decades of practiced composure, still remembered being the younger brother who looked up to someone who looked down. And then, at 61, something changed. Not dramatically, not in a confrontation. Arthur simply stopped laughing at the comments. Not coldly, not pointedly. He just stopped performing the laugh that had always smoothed the moment over and made everyone comfortable, including the person making the comment. The first time it happened, there was a brief silence at the table that nobody quite knew how to fill, and Arthur sat inside that silence and discovered something he had not expected. It was fine. The silence was completely fine. The discomfort in the room was not his responsibility to resolve. The awkwardness belonged to the comment and to the person who had made it, not to the person who had simply declined to applaud it. Epictetus wrote in words that Arthur would later find in a book his daughter gave him, "Seek not the good in external things, seek it in yourself." For decades, Arthur had been seeking something in the dynamic with his brother. Some resolution, some recognition, some moment in which the hierarchy would be corrected or acknowledged or dissolved. He had been waiting for his brother to change. His brother was not going to change, but Arthur could stop waiting. And Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius about the cost of other people's opinions, said something that reframes the entire question of self-respect. It is a rough road that leads to the heights of greatness. The roughness Seneca was describing was not the difficulty of achievement. It was the difficulty of maintaining your own standard in a world that constantly invites you to lower it. For comfort, for belonging, for the path of least resistance at a family dinner table. Self-respect costs something. It costs the performance, the smoothing over, the laugh you don't mean, the silence you keep when something in you knows you should speak, the agreement you signal with your body even while your mind disagrees. When Arthur stopped paying those costs, when he stopped performing the version of himself that made his brother's behavior possible, something unexpected happened. His brother did not escalate. He did not become hostile or defensive or wounded. He adjusted. Quietly, without acknowledgement. The way people adjust when a rule they didn't know was being enforced suddenly is. Arthur did not get an apology. He did not get a renegotiated relationship or a heart-to-heart conversation. He got something more valuable. He got back the hour after Christmas dinner that he used to spend in the car alone, replaying the comments and feeling diminished. He spent it with his grandchildren instead. Here is the second principle. Self-respect is not free. It costs you the performance, it costs you the laugh you don't mean, the agreement you don't feel, the silence you keep to make someone else comfortable at your own expense. The day you stop paying those costs is the day you discover that most of what you were protecting, the peace of the room, the comfort of the moment, the relationship as it currently exists, was not actually peace or comfort or a real relationship. It was a performance of those things, and you are done performing. Theresa, the people who stay and the people who leave. Imagine a woman named Josephine. She is 48 years old, a graphic designer in Seattle who built her freelance business from nothing over 15 years and is, by any honest assessment, exceptional at what she does. For most of those 15 years, Josephine operated with a particular approach to clients that she told herself was professionalism, but that she now understands with the clarity of hindsight was something closer to fear. She undercharged. She over-delivered. She accepted feedback that was not feedback but contempt. Clients who revised her work, not because it wasn't good, but because having the power to revise gave them a feeling of control they enjoyed. She answered emails at 11 at night and apologized for response times that were, by any reasonable standard, prompt. She told herself this was the cost of doing business. It was the cost of something. But it was not business. It was the belief, quiet, foundational, rarely examined, that her work was not quite worth full price, that her time was not quite worth full respect, that the clients who treated her well were the exceptions she was grateful for, and the ones who didn't were the norm she had to endure. And then a client, the worst one, the one who had revised a logo 47 times and still wasn't satisfied and had begun CCing her on emails to other people, suggesting that perhaps they needed someone with more experience, said something in a video call that Josephine replays sometimes, not because it was devastating, because it was the last one. He said, in a tone of casual authority, "I just feel like you're not really hearing what I'm trying to tell you." And Josephine, who had spent 6 months hearing nothing else, who had restructured the project 3 times based on feedback that contradicted itself, who had answered his messages on a Sunday morning while her daughter waited for her to come downstairs, Josephine said something she had never said to a client. "I think we're probably not the right fit for each other. I'm going to step back from this project." The silence on the other end of the call lasted 4 seconds. She counted them, and then she ended the call and sat at her desk and waited for the catastrophe she had been avoiding for 6 months to arrive. It didn't. What arrived instead was something she had forgotten the texture of: space, mental space, emotional space. The hours she had been spending managing this one client's moods redistributed themselves across her actual life. She raised her rates. She rewrote her client agreement to include terms she had always wanted but never believed she deserved to ask for. She lost 2 clients who pushed back on the new terms. She gained 4 who didn't. Marcus Aurelius wrote in a passage that Josephine would have found useful 6 months earlier, "Confine yourself to the present, for with what you have to work, with reason and justice, do the work you have at hand." Reason and justice, not fear, not the accommodation of people who mistake your professionalism for an invitation to take more. Reason, justice, the work itself, done on terms that reflect its actual worth. And Epictetus, who understood the relationship between self-worth and the people you attract, wrote, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." The clients Josephine lost when she raised her standards were not losses. They were conclusions, the natural end of relationships that had only existed inside the old terms. What replaced them were relationships built on the new ones. And the difference was not just financial. It was the difference between dreading Monday morning and looking forward to it. Here is the third principle. When you raise your standard, some people will leave. Let them, not with anger, not with a speech, not with the satisfaction of finally saying everything you held back. Just let them. Because the people who only existed inside your tolerance of disrespect were never really in a relationship with you. They were in a relationship with your willingness to accept less than you deserved. Change the terms. Watch who stays. The ones who stay are the ones worth building with. 4. The voice that changes. Now meet a man named Samuel. He is 55 years old, a high school history teacher in Philadelphia who has spent 30 years in classrooms that required him to command attention, maintain authority, and manage rooms full of people who did not always want to be managed. In his professional life, Samuel has never had difficulty with his voice. He speaks with the particular ease of a man who has spent decades being heard in rooms that required him to be heard. But outside the classroom, Samuel has a different voice, or rather, he has had for most of his adult life a different relationship to his own voice, one that he has never quite understood but has always felt. In the classroom he is clear. He says what he means. He does not apologize for the space he takes up. He does not qualify every statement with a softener or end every opinion with a question mark disguised as a sentence. But in his personal life, with his ex-wife, with his adult children, with the friends he has had since college, with his aging mother whose criticism has never softened with age, Samuel's voice changes. It becomes careful, hedged, smaller than the man who stands in front of 30 teenagers every morning and holds the room. He has spent years wondering why, and the answer, when he finally found it, was not comfortable. The voice that changes is the voice that learned, in the spaces where it mattered most, that being heard was conditional, that in certain relationships, with certain people taking up your full space, saying the thing clearly, holding the position, declining to hedge, carried a cost that felt too high to pay. So he paid a different cost, the cost of smallness, the cost of the carefully qualified sentence, the cost of the genuine opinion softened into something the room could accept. And the problem with that cost is that it compounds. Every time you make your voice smaller to fit a space that should have been large enough to hold it, you practice smallness. And practice in human behavior, as in everything else, produces fluency. Samuel had become fluent in a diminished version of himself. Cato the Younger, who spoke in the Roman Senate with such uncompromising directness that Julius Caesar considered him his most formidable opponent, despite the fact that Cato commanded no armies and held no military power, said nothing particularly famous about voice, but he demonstrated something that Marcus Aurelius wrote about directly. Speak both in the Senate and to every man, whoever he may be, appropriately, not with any affected air. Appropriately, not carefully, not strategically, not with the calculation of a person managing the room's reaction rather than speaking from their actual position. Appropriately, which means as the situation actually deserves, with the full weight of what you actually think. And Seneca, who spent years in Nero's court watching men perform opinions they didn't hold in order to survive, wrote with the bitterness of personal experience, "Recede into ips, withdraw into yourself, not as a retreat, as a return to the voice that exists before it learns to hedge, before it learns that certain rooms require a smaller version of you, before it internalizes the lesson that being heard is something you earn by first making yourself acceptable to the room." Samuel began at 55 to practice something he had not practiced since he was young enough to be unself-conscious about it. He began to say the thing clearly, once, without the hedge at the end, without the question mark disguised as a sentence, without the softener that transformed his genuine position into a position with an escape route built in. He said it. He let it stand. He watched what happened. What happened was not what he feared. Some conversations became briefly uncomfortable and then became real in a way they had never been before. Some relationships shifted, not dramatically but perceptibly, into a register where both people were actually present rather than performing presence. And some people who had only ever been comfortable with the smaller Samuel became uncomfortable with the real one. He did not chase their comfort. Here is the fourth principle. The day you stop tolerating disrespect is also the day you stop tolerating the diminished version of your own voice, because they are the same thing. The tolerance of disrespect from outside and the practice of smallness inside are not separate problems. They are the same problem, expressed in two directions. Speak clearly, once, without apology. Let the room adjust to you. You have spent long enough adjusting to it. 5. What life looks like on the other side. Finally, there is a woman named Margaret. She is 64 years old, and she is what this entire video has been building toward. Not because her life is perfect, or because she found a formula and executed it without flaw, but because Margaret is what the earlier principles look like when they have had years to settle into a person and become simply who she is. She is a retired nurse practitioner. She has been widowed once and has been in a good relationship for 9 years. She has 3 adult children, 2 relationships that are genuinely close, and one that is a work in progress, which she has made peace with. She has lost friends and made new ones. She has had seasons of her life that were very hard and seasons that were very good, and she no longer spends much time trying to determine which kind of season she is currently in. She lives, as best she can, in the one that is actually happening. What people notice about Margaret, though they do not always have words for what they are noticing, is that she is impossible to destabilize, not because she is cold. She is one of the warmest people in any room she enters. Not because she doesn't care, she cares deeply and says so without embarrassment. But because somewhere in her 60s, After a lifetime of accumulating the lessons that this video has tried to articulate, Margaret reached a place where her sense of her own worth is simply no longer available to be altered by other people's behavior toward her. She knows what she is, not perfectly, not without the daily, ordinary work of being a human being with doubts and limitations and things she is still learning. But in the way that matters most, the way that makes disrespect simply slide off rather than sink in, she knows. And that knowing did not come from a single decision, or a single principle, or a single conversation, or a single video. It came from the accumulated weight of all the times she said not anymore and meant it, all the standards she set and held, all the performances she stopped giving, all the voices she allowed to be as large as they actually were, all the people she let leave when the terms changed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, near the end of his meditations, in the tone of a man speaking to himself across whatever years remained to him, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. His own soul, not a different city, not a different job, not a different set of relationships or a different life designed to avoid the friction that the current one keeps producing. His own soul. The quieter and more untroubled retreat is not something you find outside. It is something you build inside, slowly, through exactly the kind of work this video has been describing. And Epictetus, who had built that retreat under conditions that make most of our difficulties look manageable, wrote in his final teaching something so simple it almost disappears. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. Make the best use of what is in your power. Your standard, your voice, your boundaries, your choice of who gets close and on what terms, your decision about what you will and will not absorb, your commitment to the person you are becoming rather than the person you are performing. All of that is in your power. Take the rest as it happens. The behavior of others, their opinions, their disrespect if it comes, their approval if it comes, their understanding if it comes, their departure if it comes. Take the rest as it happens. Margaret does not control whether people treat her well. She never did. Nobody does. What she controls, what she has spent 64 years learning to control with increasing precision and decreasing drama, is what she does when they don't. And what she does is very simple. She maintains her standard. She uses her real voice. She declines to perform. She lets the people who can't meet the terms find their way to someone else. She invests in the ones who can. And she lives inside all of that, with a quality of peace that is not the peace of someone who has given up. It is the peace of someone who has finally, fully arrived at themselves. That is what life looks like on the other side of the decision. Not perfect, not easy, not free from difficulty or loss or the ordinary friction of being a person in the world, but real, genuinely, durably, unmistakably real. We started today with a day that does not announce itself. The day when something inside you shifts, not with anger, not with drama, not with the confrontation you rehearsed, but with a quiet, unargued clarity that says, not anymore. And we walked through 5 principles that the Stoics built their lives around, 5 things that become possible on the other side of that decision. The standard you tolerate is the standard you set. Raise it clearly, calmly, and without negotiation, and the quality of every relationship in your life begins to shift. Self-respect is not free. It costs you the performance, the laugh you don't mean, the agreement you don't feel, the silence that protects someone else's comfort at the expense of your own dignity. When you raise your standard, some people will leave. Let them. They were in a relationship with your tolerance, not with you. The day you stop tolerating disrespect from outside is also the day you stop practicing smallness inside. Your voice deserves its full size, give it that. And on the other side of all of it, when the decisions accumulate and the standards hold and the performances stop and the real voice speaks, what you find is not a perfect life. What you find is a real one. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in the private language of a man trying to remember what mattered. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. You have wasted enough time. Enough time absorbing what diminishes you. Enough time performing what protects others at the cost of yourself. Enough time waiting for the world to treat you the way you deserve to be treated before you decide that you deserve it. You deserve it now, not when you have earned enough, not when you have proved enough, not when the people who have been withholding their respect finally decide to extend it. Now. The day you stop tolerating disrespect is not a day in the future. It is a decision available to you in this moment. And the life that follows that decision, quieter, cleaner, more genuinely yours than anything that came before it, is already waiting. Take care of your mind. The world will take care of itself. Until next time.